life. So it explains about mainly about drugs and medicines. First, what is meaning of drugs? These are chemicals with low molecular mass. What is that? 100 to 500 units of mass, and interacts with interacts with macromolecules. These are called as a drugs. And what is a medicine? Medicines. It is a chemical substance which diagnoses and prevent or cure diseases. Prevent or cure diseases. This is called as a medicine, and a very small amount of this chemical substance, which is called medicine, it is used for therapeutic effect. And if this amount increases, it causes some side effects. So, what is the classification of this drugs or medicines? So, we write here classification. First classification is that is based on pharmacological effect. How drugs are classified? So these drugs are classified into first one is called as a analgesics. Second is called as a antiseptics. Third is called as a antimicrobials, antihistamines, and the next one is called as a antibiotics. So based on pharmacological effect, drugs are divided into four types. Analgesics. What is this analgesics? These are body pain relievers. Body pain relievers are called analgesics. And what is meaning of antiseptics? So this antiseptics are what is that? A very strong. Uh, this is a prevent or is a kill the microorganisms, kill pathogens, and prevent from diseases. These are called as a antiseptics. And next is antiseptics are applicable to outside of this body, that is the skin. And next is antihistamines, prevent releasing of histamine, prevent releasing of histamine. That is called antihistamines. It is internally taken. It is produced by microorganisms, and it is very what is that? It is important for to kill virus and also bacteria. Antibiotics are used. Next is antipyretics. What is this antipyretics? What is the histamine here? Histamine causes some uh, lung infections, eye itching because of the releasing of histamine. Some irritating effects are because of histamine that prevents the antihistamine prevents releasing of histamine. And the antiseptics are applicable to what is that? The growth of microorganisms or kill of pathogens. Next, antipyretics. What is this antipyretics? It reduces body temperature. It is called as a antipyretics. Anti-malarial drugs prevent diseases of bacteria like malaria, which are called anti-malarials. Next is tranquilizers. What is that? What is that? It can control the neurosis related diseases, neurosis related diseases, or diseases related to central nervous system controlled by tranquilizers, and next is called as a antacids. So antacids, what is that? It reduces reduces or prevents the formation of acidic compounds in body, that is acidic acid in stomach, because generally HCl acid is produced in stomach. That excess production of that is important for digestion process. That excess acid production can be prevented by antacids. So based on this pharmacological effect, so drugs are divided into analgesics, generally body pain relievers, antiseptics. These are applied to outside of that body, that is skin, applied on skin, kill pathogens. Antibiotics, it kills this virus and bacteria. Antihistamines prevent releasing of histamines, which causes irritating effect. Antipyretics reduces body temperature. Anti-malarial drugs, which prevent disease of what is that? Prevent that growth of bacteria. Disease of malaria, it is used generally. Tranquilizers are used as a sedatives, and neurosis diseases, it is used. Antacids reduces formation of excess acid in the stomach, or excess acid can be controlled by antacid. These are the classification based on pharmacological effect. And next is the basis of drug action. How it is classified? Basis of drug action. Second classification is basis of drug action. What is that? These are again based on drug action. These are divided into antihistamines. First one. Second is called as a cardiovascular drugs. Third is called as a sedatives. And fourth one is called hypnotics. The sedatives and the hypnotics act on central nervous system, and which prevents the depression, anxiety that can be relieved by sedatives and hypnotics. Cardiovascular diseases, it is mainly applicable on blood circulating system and heart. These are called cardiovascular vascular drugs. Antihistamines produces prevent the formation of histamine enzyme, which is in body. These are these are classification of drugs based on this biological drug action. And next is on the based on chemical nature, on based on chemical nature. So how these drugs are classified? First is called as a sulfur drugs. We can call it as a sulfonamide drugs. And second is called as a what is that? Esters based on chemicals. And third is called as a alcohols. Alcohols. Maximum number of drugs contains say sulfonamides, and few are esters, and also alcohol chemical compounds are present as a main component in drugs. And next is on basis of molecular target. On basis of molecular targets, how drugs are classified. First is target is nucleic acid, or target is carbohydrates, or target is lipids, or target is proteins. So drugs act on this proteins or lipids or what is that? Carbohydrates or what is that? Nucleic acids. Generally, we take one example: proteins as a molecular targets. So proteins all they can form enzymes also. Enzymes are called as a biocatalyst. What is the These are the proteins. Enzymes are nothing but proteins. This enzyme reacts with the substrate present in body, and what is that enzyme substrate complex is formed here, and it is converted into product. This is called substrate. So in this way, metabolic functions takes place. Metabolic functions takes place here. Product is formed in this case. So this drugs can what is that prevents the reaction of enzyme. Sometimes it prevents the reaction of enzyme with the substrate, so that some harmful effects can be prevented by the drugs. How they are interacted? They are interacted by drugs interacted by enzymes to prevent the metabolic functions, which disturb the body functions. Some metabolic functions are prevented by drugs and enzyme. Generally, it contains some active site. Their substrate added and it is converted into complex and again finally converted into product. It is how it is prevented by this drugs. Some drugs acts on enzymes. So here, first is competitive inhibitors. Enzyme acts as drug acts as a competitive inhibitors and also non-competitive inhibitors. So what is meaning of competitive inhibitors? On that active site of enzyme compared to substrate, drug is interacted more rapidly. So active site is what is that? It is covered by it is occupied by drug. So the reaction with the substrate is prevented. These are called competitive inhibitors. And second time is called as a non-competitive inhibitors. So in this non-competitive inhibitors, drugs can interact with enzyme on some other sites, which are called as the allosteric sites. Since these allosteric sites, when occupied by drugs, then the target molecule, or we can take it as a substrate molecule, that cannot recognize the active site because it can change the drugs attached to some other sites of that enzyme and it can change the shape or active site position of that enzyme. So substrate cannot recognize that active position. So the reaction between these two is prevented. These are called non-competitive inhibitors, and this is where the drug is attached to enzyme and that reshape the enzyme. That is called as a allosteric sites. So this is a it can so drugs can prevent the enzyme action like histamine enzyme that production can be prevented by drugs in this way because histamine enzyme produced can causes some irritation effects in body. Next is receptor as a drug. Receptor as a drug. So some proteins which are called as a receptor proteins. So this receptor proteins acts as a what is it? Chemical messengers. These messengers, or we can write here chemical messengers. So it can transfer the signals from in between neurons for metabolic functions. These are called receptor proteins through some chemicals. So the transfer of chemicals, the message also transferred. So these are called as a chemical messengers. So this what is that? These messengers are received at binding sites, active sites again of this receptor protein. Receptor protein. These chemical substances are added that chemical messengers can be transferred between neurons. Okay, so different body functions are takes place because of that some chemical substances which are called as which interacts with the receptor proteins and acts as a chemical messenger between different neurons. So sometimes this messenger, some reactions can be prevented, some neuron functions can be prevented. That is called drugs. So here we use some drugs. So these drugs bind to receptor site, bind to receptor protein. So these chemicals cannot be added. So no chemical substances are added which acts as the messengers. No chemical substance are added. then that what is that function can be prevented, and this type of drugs are called antagonist. What is that? It binds with the receptor proteins and prevents the what is that neuron functions, some neuron functions which are not required for body. These are called antagonist. And sometimes these receptor proteins are not present, and receptor proteins, that body function is important, that message is important in between neurons, the message is important. So but here lack of receptor proteins are present. That can be prevented by using of such drugs, and these drugs acts as a chemical messengers in place of uh, receptor proteins, chemical messengers in place of receptor proteins. So this type of drugs are called as a agonist. So what is this antagonist? Some neurons, some chemical messages not required. So the drugs or receptor proteins that the reactions can be prevented. In this case, drugs can bind with the active site of that receptor proteins. So that chemical message is prevented. These are called antagonists. Sometimes the message is important in between neurons. So drugs, because of lack of receptor proteins, the drugs are used, which acts as a chemical messengers between different neurons. These are called as a agonist. So here, receptor act. What is that? It acts as an active site in this case. And the next one is called as a antacids. So antacids, what is use of antacids? In our body, stomach, HCl is produced, but excess of consumption of excess of acidic food or excess of HCl can cause ulcers in the internal system, that is digestive system. It causes some pain also. So irritation also it causes. So in this case, antacids are used. So antacids are generally weak bases. Antacids are weak bases, and it prevents formation of excess acid in stomach or in body. So what are the antacids? We take examples. Some are examples: sodium hydrogen carbonate, one antacid, or magnesium hydroxide, and aluminum hydroxide gel. These are called as some antacids. Antacid generally increases pH value, so acidic nature can be decreases, and sometimes mixture of magnesium hydroxide and aluminum hydroxides also used in as a antacids. Next drug is called as a antihistamine. So what is this antihistamines? Histamine is chemical substance. Histamine is chemical substance or chemical that stimulates what is that secretion of pepsin and histamine. That is the use of this uh, and also hydrochloric acid, HCl, in the stomach. This is a what is that histamine nature. So histamine, and also it contracts smooth muscles in the bronchi. Why it contracts smooth muscles in bronchi? To prevent entering of some irritating substances from outside, like pollen grains, uh, dust, or sheep wool. These are the enter into bronchi, that can be prevented by histamine, which contracts smooth muscles of bronchi and also gut. So because of this, respiration problems takes place because of production of excess amount of histamine. So for asthma patients mainly, that respiration disorders takes place. Respiration is that is a restricted, so that can be prevented by using of antihistamine drugs. What are the antihistamine drugs? Some names of antihistamine drugs are Dimetap, some antihistamine drug. Next, Benadryl. For the cough, we use this Benadryl, Seldate, Avil. These are some antihistamine drugs are used to prevent formation of histamine. For Zantac is used for irritating conditions, and Seldane also used. These are some examples of antihistamine drugs. After that, antihistamine drugs, the next drugs are called as a next type of drugs are example for what is that tranquilizers, which also called as a we can call it as a neurologically active drugs, which are called neurologically active drugs. So, what is example? That is example is tranquilizers. So, what is use of tranquilizers, which affects message transfer mechanism in neurons? Message transfer mechanism in neurons, in between neurons, and it is used for the patients which are suffered with anxiety and stress, stress, or what is that, excitement, more excited, excitement, or mental diseases, mental diseases, and for depression also, these tranquilizers are used. So, some examples of tranquilizers, we take some examples here. Valium. So, names are important here. Serotonin, uh, Equanil. So, these are some examples of tranquilizers which are used for mental disorders, depression, stress, and very important is the derivatives of derivatives of bar butyric acid. Also, one example for this. What is that? Tranquilizers. So this is what is the use of this tranquilizers? Tranquilizers used to prevent what is that? Anxiety, stress, excitement, mental disease, and also depression that can be prevented. And next type of drugs are called as a analgesics. What is the role of this analgesics? This analgesics, what is that? Decreases or reduces body pains and fever also. Analgesics are again divided into two types. One is called narcotic analgesics. Second is called as a non-narcotic non-narcotic analgesics. So for severe body pain, we use some drugs like aspirin, paracetamol, which can prevent diseases also. So these are called non-narcotic analgesics. And some drugs are there which use for severe pains, like post-operative pain, after operation, post-operative pains, and for cancer patients, the severe pain that can be prevented by narcotic analgesics. We take example for this narcotic analgesics are like what is that morphine. You know, drugs are used here. Morphine, codeine, and heroin. These are some examples of narcotic analgesics. And next type of drugs are called as a antipyretics. What is this role of this antipyretics, which control body temperature, which controls the body temperature? This is the first important nature of this antipyretics, and body pains also controlled. So, what are examples of antipyretics? We take example phenacetin, and one more example is paracetamol. Paracetamol is used as antipyretics and also anti uh, analgesics. Also, it is used. Next are antimicrobials. So, to prevent growth of microorganisms like bacteria. So, the bacteria growth is mainly prevented by antimicrobials. Okay. What is that examples here? One example is lysozyme. One example, or lactic acid. This is also one example. What is that? Penicillin. Penicillin. Next is chloramphenicol. These are some examples for antimicrobials. Next is antibiotics. Antibiotics kills virus, mainly virus. It is more effective virus and also bacteria. These antibiotics are used. Fungus also. What is the fungal diseases also? Antibiotics are used, and these antibiotics are produced by other type of microorganisms like fungus. Mainly, they produce from microorganisms and kills that other microorganisms. These are called as a antibiotic, and it should be effective, very effective at a low concentration. It is highly effective at low concentration. And what is that? What is the effect of this? Is retard? It may be retard or survival, retard growth or survival of microorganisms. This is important function. So microorganisms, antibiotics are two types here. They are divided based on this action. One is called as a bactericidals of antibiotics, and second type is called as a bacteriostatic type of antibiotics. Bactericidals means they kill bacteria. They kill bacteria. That is called bactericidal. One example for this is penicillin, oflaxin. These are few examples of bactericidals. And what is that? Bacteriostatic, some examples are erythromycin. What is that? It prevents the growth of bacteria. Example is erythromycin, amoxicillin. These are some examples here, or we can take. These are some examples for what type of bacteriostatic type of antibiotics. Again, antibiotics are divided into two types. One is called as a broad spectrum antibiotics, and next is a narrow spectrum antibiotics. So broad spectrum antibiotics are applicable to many diseases. That is importance of this. What is that? Broad spectrum antibiotics. Example for this broad spectrum antibiotic is chloro, uh, chloramphenicol. One example for this. A narrow spectrum is example is penicillin G. That is one example for narrow spectrum. Sulfur drugs also example for broad spectrum antibiotics. We take an example sulfa diazine. Some more examples are sulfur sulfurson. That are one more example here. These are example for broad spectrum antibiotics. And next is antiseptics and disinfectant. Antiseptics are what is that? Examples are furacin, soframycin. These are some examples of antiseptics. What is that? They can be applied on living tissues. Applied on living tissues. These antibiotics are used. Antiseptics are used. It is used in face powders also, or breath purifiers also. These antiseptics are used. And next is some more examples are Dettol. One more example is tincture of iodine. What is this tincture of iodine? 2 to 3% of iodine in alcohol and water mixture. This is an example for some antibiotic. And one more example is iodoform also used as a antibiotic. Bitheanol is used as a antibiotic. So bitheanol, furacin, soframycin, Dettol, tincture of iodine, iodoform. These are some examples of antibiotics. So what is this antibiotic? Again, it is applied on living tissues only. It is not applied internally. It is applied outside only. And next is called as a disinfectants. So what is this disinfectants? These are what is that? Kill bacteria growth. And some insects also, microorganisms also killed by disinfectants. And what is that? It is used in a floors or drainages or toilets. Toilets also disinfectants are used. What are disinfectants? 0 to 2% of phenol. Generally acts as antiseptic. But if we take 1% of phenol, it acts as a disinfectant. So 1% is acts as a disinfectant. Low concentration of sulfur dioxide, 4% aqueous solution of formaldehyde also acts as a disinfectant. Formalin solution also acts as a disinfectant. Generally, formalin solution is used for preserve biological specimens. So the biological specimens can be preserved by using of this disinfectant drugs, formalin solution. And next step is called as a anti-fertility drugs. What is use of this anti-fertility drugs here? Anti-fertility drugs are nothing but these are birth control pills. So, what are the examples of this? And also it controls menstrual cycle also, female menstrual cycle. That is also controlled by what is that? Anti-fertility drugs. So some examples of this are northindrone. One example of this. One more example is novestrol is also one example of this anti-fertility drugs. estrogen hormones also given here. What is that example? Synthetic or ethinyl estradiol. These are synthetic hormones also given to prevent this menstrual cycle and birth control. These are used. So these are different types of what is the drugs used uh, in what is the medicinal industry, and with remaining part